Hello, and welcome to Emerald Corporation. Today, we will go over the steps to a safe, efficient, and correct way to load parts onto the assembly line. It is important to note that while working with Emerald Corporation, you will work with a variety of parts. While all parts are different and will have different load instructions, this video will go over the general concepts to make for a successful load, which will help lead to a successful part at the unload station. Your first step with every part will involve one member of your team going through the load conveyor area setup checklist. This member will make sure the area is correctly set up for loading of the new part. This includes steps such as making sure the raw product currently set up for the load is the correct product. The Plex job is ready and set up, and making sure all members of the team have reviewed their work instructions to properly do his or her job along with various other jobs. After reviewing the work instructions, each employee needs to initial or sign in their select department on the load conveyor area setup check sheet to verify that they are ready to work on the next part. It is important to note that whether you are wiping, loading the parts on the splines, or blowing the parts off, these instructions are for each role. Following these instructions is vital to maintaining a product that the consumer will be happy to purchase. Let us begin with the first step for this part to be properly loaded onto the assembly line and ready to be painted. The first step for this individual product is to properly remove the part from the bag. This is a friendly reminder that while some parts may come in a bag, not all parts will, so you will want to check with your work instructions for each individual part for proper load. Each part must be individually taken from the bag. After you take this part from the bag, you will want to give the part a visual inspection. If that part passes your visual inspection, you should place the part on the table next to you. The bag from the part should be left in the container. When the container is empty on parts but full on bags, you can put those bags in the cardboard container next to the line. It is important that you properly remove the product from the bag. You should not shake the product out from the bag. This can result in damaging the part itself. It is also important that you do not take the parts out of the bag and then place that part back into the container. You may think you are helping by getting ahead of the conveyor belt, but instead you are putting more dirt and debris on that part, thus putting that part at a greater chance of needing to be scrapped. Once the bag has been taken off and the product set on the table, you can begin the process to put the product onto the conveyor belt. From the table, another employee will take the product and wipe the outside of the product with a clean, quick wipe. While wiping the product, this employee should also give the product a quick visual inspection, looking for any mold defects. After proper inspection, your next step will be to pass the part over the air cannon. This properly ensures that every inch of the product will be ready to be painted. After the product has passed over the air cannon, you can properly set the product onto the conveyor belt. It is important that you place the part in the correct orientation and in the correct position. This allows for the product to get the proper amount of air pressure while going across the conveyor belt. One thing we never want any employee to do with a product is to push or pull a product onto the conveyor belt. The belt itself is a rough texture and will damage the part. Let's review loading this part onto the conveyor belt. The first possible step is removing a part from the bag. Once we have the bag, we will give it a quick visual inspection. Assuming it passes, we will place that part on the table next to us. There, a different employee will again visually inspect the part while giving the part a wipe down. After the wipe down, the part will be placed over the air cannon. And the final step is to properly place the part on the conveyor belt. After the product has passed through the air pressure, it is now the employee's job to wipe the product clean and properly place the product onto the rack. While taking the part off the conveyor belt, you should again give a quick visual inspection. Each employee must lift up each part individually. From there, the employee will begin one continuous wipe around the part. It is important to remember that this wipe should be one solid wipe that should end by flowing off the part and not just suddenly stop on the part. We call this coming off the part with a cloth. Remember, each product is put on the rack different, and you will want to reference the work instructions for complete details on how each part gets put on. With all products, it is important to load from the top to the bottom. This helps ensure minimal products hitting each other. The other important idea is to remember a product should never touch the universal rack while placing the product on the splines. Once one of the loaders has finished his or her side, you spin the rack so the opposing loader can finish their side. Let's review loading this part onto the rack. The first step was to take the part and give a quick visual inspection. After that visual inspection, perform a coming off the part with a cloth wipe. After this wipe, you should place the part onto the rack. This part should correctly fit onto the spline without damaging itself or the rack itself. Once one of the loaders has finished his or her side, you spin the rack so the opposing loader can finish their side. Let's take a look at another part that involves a different process to go from the conveyor belt to the assembly line. Some parts involve loading on two separate sides of the rack and involve performing a wipe after the part has already been placed on the rack. Here's a part that requires the operator to load parts on each side of the rack after taking the part off of the conveyor belt. As always, we will continue to load the part onto the rack at the top and work our way down. With this part, we place two parts on at a time. After you have finished loading one entire side of the rack, you will spin the rack 180 degrees in order to properly load the other side. Once the rack has fully entered the wiping area, the wiper will begin to wipe down the part. As with loading the parts, this employee will begin at the topmost part and work his or her way down. With this wipe, it is important that we use one continuous motion that starts at the top of the part and ends at the bottom of the part. It is important that when we finish wiping down the part, we finish with the cloth coming off the part and not the cloth just staying on. It is equally as important that we use our entire hand to cover the entire part, as we are wiping the part to ensure that we do not miss any dirt or debris. Once one side of the rack has been properly wiped, we will spin the rack 180 degrees and begin the pattern all over again on the opposite side. Let's review. The first step with this part is to place it on the assembly line. You will start at the top of the rack and work your way down. Once one side of the rack has been finished, you will flip that rack around and fill the other side. Once the rack enters the wiping area, the wiper will wipe down every part. He or she will start at the top of the rack and work their way down. Once they have finished one side of the rack, they will rotate the rack 180 degrees and then do the same pattern on the opposite side. The next step in the assembly process is blowing the parts off to give them one final clean before they enter the paint station. The key when blowing off parts is to always follow the same pattern. You should start at the top and work your way down, while making sure not to miss any spots on your side. If you have finished the pattern before your rack leaves your work area, then you should begin the pattern all over again until the part leaves the area. Your area is defined by the mat on which you stand. You should not have to lean one way or another in order to get to a part. Once a new rack has fully entered your area and the old rack has fully left your area, you can begin on the new rack. Let's review blowing off this part on the rack. Once the rack is fully in your area, you will begin your pattern of blowing. This will start at the top and you will make your way to the bottom without missing any spots. Once the rack has left your area, you can move on to the next rack and begin your pattern all over again.